At 79, Diane Keaton left behind a career that defined modern cinema, and a silence that left one man, Woody Allen, utterly shattered. Now, in the wake of her passing, he breaks his silence to reveal the truth about their unspoken bond, a truth he's kept for nearly 60 years. The story begins in Los Angeles, 1946. Diane Hall, later known to the world as Diane Keaton, grew up in a modest home filled with music, laughter, and the dreams of a young girl who wanted to be more than ordinary. She moved east to New York City, a city that didn't promise her anything, but gave her everything. The theater became her sanctuary. It was there, under the lights of Broadway, that Keaton's unique blend of vulnerability and eccentric charm first caught attention. In 1971, she earned a Tony nomination for Play It Again, Sam, the very play that would introduce her to a man who would shape the rest of her life: Woody Allen. Allen, already a rising comedian and filmmaker, noticed something about Diane no one else did: a disarming honesty wrapped in humor. She wasn't the typical Hollywood ingenue. She laughed too loud, dressed her own way, and never tried to please the camera. To Allen, she was cinematic truth in motion. Their chemistry was undeniable. On stage, it turned to rhythm, offstage, to romance. Together, they built something fragile yet fiercely creative, a partnership that blurred the line between muse and lover. Then came Annie Hall. Allen wrote the film for her, molding Annie's quirks, wit, and wide-eyed wonder after Diane herself. The world saw it as fiction. Allen later admitted it was personal. Their art mirrored their life: tender, funny, complicated. And when Annie Hall swept the Oscars in 1978, earning Keaton Best Actress, she stood radiant, wearing her trademark vest and tie, as the world finally understood why Woody Allen had written her into history. Their romance didn't end with fireworks. There were no public fights, no scathing interviews, no broken glass scattered across the tabloids. When the romance between Diane Keaton and Woody Allen came to its quiet close, it left behind something most relationships in Hollywood never find: peace. It ended quietly, without bitterness, replaced by something rarer. Before Annie Hall, before the Oscars, before Woody became a lightning rod for controversy, and Diane a symbol of quirky elegance, there were just two young actors in New York, both uncertain, both searching, both about to change each other's lives. The year was 1969. The Vietnam War raged abroad, while in the heart of Manhattan, the counterculture bloomed. The city was loud, electric, restless. And yet, in the small, dimly lit theaters of Broadway and off-Broadway, something quieter was taking shape. That's where Diane Keaton, then in her early 20s, first crossed paths with Woody Allen. She had just landed a part in Allen's stage play, Play It Again, Sam. At the time, Woody was already a rising comedic voice, a stand-up philosopher, a neurotic intellectual who mined anxiety for humor. Diane, by contrast, was a free spirit with an unfiltered laugh, an unconventional beauty, and a magnetic awkwardness that audiences couldn't look away from. In rehearsals, something clicked. Not instantly, not romantically, but rhythmically. They shared an instinct for timing that was almost musical. Where Woody's humor was cerebral, Diane's was intuitive. Where he wrote with sharp irony, she played with unpredictable warmth. Together, they made each other's words sing. Their chemistry on stage didn't go unnoticed. Critics praised Keaton for bringing a radiant humanity to Allen's neurotic characters. Offstage, their friendship deepened. They spent long nights talking about movies, art, loneliness, and the absurdity of fame, subjects that would later define their work together. By the early 1970s, their connection had become something more intimate. They began dating, quietly, away from headlines. But even in private, their relationship was marked not by passion's chaos, but by a kind of gentle, mutual respect. Diane often said Woody made her laugh like no one else. Woody later admitted that Diane's presence made him braver as a filmmaker. Their romance, short-lived as it was, would set the stage for one of the most creatively fruitful partnerships in American cinema. In 1977, Annie Hall changed everything. It wasn't just another romantic comedy. It was the romantic comedy, the film that reshaped what love stories could look like on screen. Gone were the glossy illusions of perfect couples and happy endings. In their place stood something raw, honest, and heartbreakingly real. At its core were two people: Annie Hall, played by Diane Keaton, a whimsical, insecure, endlessly endearing singer, and Alvy Singer, Woody Allen's anxious, self-sabotaging comedian. Together they captured a generation's confusion about relationships, identity, and the impossibility of lasting love in modern life. The magic wasn't scripted. Much of Annie's dialogue came from Diane herself, her way of speaking, her mannerisms, even her fashion. The iconic men's suits, the floppy hats, the tie and vest ensembles, they weren't designed by costume departments. They were just Diane being Diane. Woody saw something in her that few directors had seen before: authenticity. And Diane saw in Woody something equally rare: a man who let her be fully, unapologetically herself. When Annie Hall premiered, it swept the Oscars: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, and Best Original Screenplay. For Diane, it was a defining moment. For Woody, it cemented his place among America's greatest filmmakers. For both, it became a shared triumph, a monument to a love that had transformed into art. But what made their collaboration remarkable wasn't just talent. It was the fact that they could portray heartbreak with such honesty. Not as ex-lovers clinging to the past, but as artists who had already made peace with it. In a sense, Annie Hall was their goodbye letter, wrapped in celluloid, preserved forever. After Annie Hall, Diane and Woody's lives began to diverge. Keaton went on to prove she was no one's muse. She was a powerhouse in her own right. Roles in Reds, 1981, Looking for Mr. Goodbar, 1977, and Baby Boom, 1987, showcased her range, moving from vulnerable to fierce, from comic to tragic. She worked with directors like Warren Beatty and Francis Ford Coppola, cementing her legacy as one of Hollywood's most versatile actresses. Woody, meanwhile, kept creating. Manhattan, Stardust Memories, Zelig, The Purple Rose of Cairo, he built an empire of neurotic wit and moral ambiguity, often casting actresses who, in one way or another, reminded the world of Diane: cerebral, self-possessed, and unafraid of imperfection. Through the 1980s and beyond, as Woody's career surged and the public's fascination with his private life deepened, Diane remained a steady presence, sometimes near, sometimes distant, but never gone. They were no longer a couple, but their bond was something sturdier, more rooted. They sent each other drafts, talked over ideas, and offered quiet encouragement. They didn't need to see each other every day. It was enough to know the other was out there, still creating, still believing. Then came the 1990s. It was the decade that redefined Woody Allen's public image, not through his films, but through the headlines. Allegations and custody battles consumed the tabloids, fracturing Hollywood into camps of belief and disbelief. Many of Allen's closest friends and collaborators distanced themselves. Studios hesitated. Awards committees stayed silent. The once adored auteur became, in the eyes of many, untouchable. But one person never walked away. Diane Keaton stood by him, not loudly, not defensively, but with quiet conviction. When asked about the controversy, she said simply, "I believe my friend." It wasn't a statement about guilt or innocence, it was an act of loyalty, the kind of loyalty that refuses to vanish when the world demands you choose sides. It spoke to something deeper than reputation or fear, a lifelong trust in the man she'd known long before the headlines. Her support was controversial and she knew it. But for Diane, it wasn't about taking a stand in public opinion. It was about the private truth of friendship. She understood Woody not as a symbol, but as a flawed, complicated human being. The same man who once made her laugh so hard she couldn't breathe, who saw her brilliance before anyone else did. That kind of bond isn't easily erased. In Hollywood, where loyalty often melts under the heat of scandal, Diane's faith was almost radical. In 1993, after years apart, fate, or perhaps art, brought them back together on screen. Manhattan Murder Mystery reunited them for the first time in nearly 2 decades. On the surface, it was a lighthearted comedy about a married couple investigating a possible murder in their apartment building. But beneath the humor, there was something more moving. the sight of two old friends rediscovering their rhythm. The laughter was the same, the timing still perfect. Behind the camera, it felt as if the years had melted away. Their on-screen banter had aged, but beautifully. It carried the comfort of history. Two performers who didn't need to act intimacy, because it was already there. Watching them together was like seeing Annie and Alvy decades later, older, wiser, still bickering, still bound by invisible affection. Critics noticed. They called it a return to form for both. But for Diane and Woody, it was something deeper. A reminder that the truest connections never really fade. They just evolve. After Manhattan Murder Mystery, their professional paths rarely crossed again. Diane continued to evolve, directing, writing memoirs, and embracing her own eccentric, unapologetic style. She became an icon not just for her acting, but for her refusal to conform to beauty standards, to marriage, to Hollywood expectations. Woody kept making films, dozens of them, sometimes brilliant, sometimes divisive. And through it all, Diane remained a quiet figure in his life. She didn't appear in his films again, but she appeared in his interviews, his stories, his memories. Whenever Woody spoke about her, his tone softened. "She's my best friend," he said once. "She's everything I'm not, and everything I wish I could be." And Diane, for her part, never shied from expressing her affection. In interviews, she often called Woody one of the most important people in her life, not because of their romance, but because of their understanding. There was something unspoken between them, a shared history that didn't need retelling, a private language of mutual respect. In her 2011 memoir, Then Again, Diane wrote tenderly about him, about his humor, his mind, and the way he helped shape her view of art. She never glossed over the complexity, but she also never reduced it to gossip. For her, Woody wasn't a controversy. He was a chapter, an essential one. What makes their story remarkable isn't just the films or the fame, it's the endurance. Hollywood is a place where relationships fade like movie posters in the sun. But somehow, Diane and Woody built something that survived the noise. Their friendship endured through decades of shifting culture, through marriages, heartbreaks, aging, and reinvention. In an era obsessed with beginnings and endings, theirs is a story about continuation. It reminds us that love doesn't always need to burn forever to mean forever. Sometimes, it simply changes shape, from romance to friendship, from longing to loyalty, from passion to peace. They didn't marry, didn't raise a family together, didn't even spend most of their careers side by side. And yet, when the credits roll on both of their lives, it's hard to imagine one without the other. Because Woody Allen without Diane Keaton would not have been Woody Allen as the world knows him. And Diane Keaton without Woody Allen would not have become quite the same Diane, the woman who turned eccentricity into grace and vulnerability into strength. Looking back now, more than half a century after they met, their story feels almost impossible by Hollywood standards. There are no bitter memoirs, no cruel betrayals, no revisionist regrets. Just two people who loved, laughed, and continued to care. Their legacy is more than cinematic. It's emotional. Through Annie Hall, they gave us one of the most honest portrayals of modern love ever captured on screen. The beauty of connection, and the inevitability of its loss. Through their friendship, they showed that love's ending doesn't have to mean love's disappearance. And through their loyalty, quiet, complicated, unwavering, they reminded the world that relationships aren't defined by what others understand, but by what two souls choose to keep alive. And here's the shocking truth. When news of Diane Keaton's passing broke in October 2025, Hollywood fell silent. But for Woody Allen, it was something far deeper. The loss of his compass.